before when I got in touch with you and the team, I didn't really know what would be happening here, but I was asked to prepare something about my PhD work and things related to that I could share with the group, and didn't yet know you, so I had a specific plan. But then over the course of the week, I started to become more aware of what you are actually trying to do, and so I just got transformed and shifted my plans around and tried to find something new that I could bring to the group to instigate further discussion and to perhaps supplement some perspectives. And then I also found out that I would share this space with Slava, and I was very happy to discover that we're kind of just entered into a dialogue ourselves, and we thought, how about we just use these 1.5 hours? We're going to try to make it rather 1 hour and 15 minutes so that we still have some time to talk about the journal. What might happen if we just use this space to play around with ideas, and we thought it would be interesting if I just presented for about 20, 25, perhaps 30 minutes some of the work I've been doing in the past 2 or 3 years, and with a focus on what you guys might find interesting, and then Slava can react to it and present his own ideas in response to mine, and then we can enter into a discussion about that. And we haven't staged this, so this is a new thing. Well, let's see how it transforms us. And do you want to comment on this or have further plans about what we're going to do?
That's fine. We talked over coffee, basically, and that what Max was talking about. Can I already say kind of what the author of it?
For example.
So he was talking about Adam Smith and about his 2 books, and that he have burned all the other books, because he kind of find out what are the main principles of how the society works, and from which principles the society can kind of unfold itself. And I find it actually very fascinating that those principles can. Probably not just because those principles you can. Probably I found it fascinating because of the totality of how you can approach working around those principles. That you can basically kind of create spaces, create relationships with that. But I feel that I'm a little bit missing the point here, so I'd like to.
Nice. Thank you, because then I can zoom in a little bit on that. Before my plan was to just present the PhD work I'm doing now, but I realized that it's actually, much of it has already been said here about how we construct worlds and through speech acts and so on. So I decided to shift it to something I wrote a master's thesis about 3 years ago, Adam Smith, and some problems that ensued from that, and that I've been working with since then. So we actually go back in time. What kicked this thought process off for me was a quote by Hannah Arendt, a footnote that I read in the train when coming here. I tried to read The Human Condition to prepare for Barbara's workshop, and she said, Hannah, that that she's actually going against a specific tendency in modern philosophy that she associates with Marx, Nietzsche, and Bergson, who are life philosophers, and who actually eradicate the space of human action by simply focusing on labor and the repetitive cycles of daily existence. She said, the greatest representatives of modern life philosophy are Marx, Nietzsche, and Bergson, inasmuch as all the 3 equate life and being. For this equation, they rely on introspection, and life is indeed the only being man can possibly aware of by looking merely into himself. The difference between these and the earlier philosophers of the modern age is that life appears to be more active and more productive than consciousness, which seems to be still too closely related to contemplation and the old ideal of truth. This last stage of modern philosophy is perhaps best described as the rebellion of the philosophers against philosophy, a rebellion which, beginning with Kierkegaard and ending with existentialism, appears at first glance to emphasize action as against contemplation. Upon closer inspection, however, none of these philosophers is actually concerned with action as such. We can, I think just the can is a bit cut off, but we can leave aside here Kierkegaard and his non-worldly, inward-directed acting. Nietzsche and Bergson describe action in terms of fabrication, homo faber, instead of homo sapiens, just as Marx thinks of acting in terms of making and describes labor in terms of work. But their ultimate point of reference is not work and worldliness any more than action. It is life and life's fertility. And this is from a chapter that we haven't discussed with Barbara, but it's a chapter in which she very much argues against putting labor first, in which she says how important the space of appearance is, the public, the action, and not this simple kind of concrete sense of daily labor that Marx, Nietzsche, and Bergson put into the focus of their work. And I thought, well, that's interesting, and I want to kind of argue against it, because I think that Marx, Nietzsche, and Bergson have something to say that Hannah Arendt might miss. And so I also chose like water in the background a little bit, because H2O is the power of life, and I think that life has something to it that lies underneath and goes beyond the kind of conscious action that Hannah Arendt tries to promote and the kind of political public sphere in which we see each other. There is something to transformation, to things that are happening, that goes beyond and this conscious level. So that's kind of why I named it. It's the kind of subtitles and everything. From transformative thinking to social transformation. How about what happens when we don't think about what transformative thinking is, but when we think about how social transformation actually happens? And there we enter the realm of sociology. I think that here in the group we have a very, and that's also what we explored with Ivo and Michael, we try to make things conscious. We try to be aware of what we don't see, what we don't perceive. We listen and we speak. And I think that very much fits into what I would name a cyclical theory of consciousness. It's something that Marx, in fact, himself, on this, Hannah Arendt would probably agree with him, once wrote in the Kapital, the difference between human being and animal is that what distinguishes the worst builder, human builder, laborer, from the best bee, who is just flying around and carrying building a honey and so on. From the outset is that the builder, the human, has built the cell in his head before he builds it in the wax. At the end of the labor process, a result emerges that was already present in the worker's imagination at the beginning of the process. So we have this picture, and it's a very old picture in philosophy, that acting and consciousness is cyclical. That we start with an idea, we execute, we plan what we want to do with it, we execute it, it has some sort of impact, and then we perceive or receive what happened, and kind of and further ideas pop up, so that we are always engaged in this cycle. And that cycle of consciousness, so to speak, can be visualized in different ways. But I think what's very important, and that's what we also read in the literature that was given to us, is that we don't usually make a distinction between the cyclical consciousness of the first person, singular, and the first person, plural. So we assume that this kind of loop in which we are constantly engaged is gonna also be valid on the collective level. So that I say, oh, I wanna, the experience of me wanting to have a coffee in the morning, I go to the kitchen, I turn on the coffee machine, I get this, and so on, is we think that we can also do this as a group. We think together, we develop an idea, we listen, we are engaging in dialogue, something forms, and then we do it together. And I think an important contribution of sociology So this is kind of what you get it, right? That there's like, we operate in this constant consumption, daily assumption, that there is some sort of interchangeability of the we and the I. And that we have to work on, perhaps we have to make it conscious, we have to make sure that nothing gets lost when we move from the first person singular to the first person plural. But more or less, this is very much how political theory still thinks about human action today, and Hannah Arendt is a good example of it. It's that coming together in the polis, doing something together, enables a new dimension of collective action. And I think this contribution, the unique contribution of sociology, and when sociology started to happen in the 18th century, and I got very interested in that process when I studied this master's thesis 3 years ago, is that there is a difference between moving from the non-socialized first-person singular that might have perhaps been socialized in the past, but that is not currently socializing in an active way when I go to the coffee machine in the morning and do something. That there is a difference between what happens in the first-person perspective and in the singular perspective and the plural perspective. That the social is a realm of its own that is obeying unique laws and unique regularities that can be described in a new way and that ought to be described in a new way, and that there is a specific cut between idea and plan on the collective level. That what happens when we do something together is not always what we intended to do. Which, I mean, with Evo in these practices is nothing new. But it's interesting to reflect upon what that means on the epistemic level. What happens when we try to integrate that into the sociological or theoretical description of the social. I took the notion of coupure épistémique or epistemic cut from a French philosopher, Gaston Bachelard. It's an important notion, for example, in the work of Foucault and Althusser, that in history, in social processes, there can sometimes be cuts in our epistemic access to what we are describing. That, for example, when you describe a cell, you describe it differently from how you would describe an atom. And if you describe a body, you would describe it differently from how you would describe a cell. And if you describe an assemblage of bodies, you would describe it differently from how you describe an assemblage of cells. So this idea of epistemic cut is very important to a specific branch in theory of science, French theory of science, but I think it fits quite nicely here. Good. That is sort of what I started with when preparing when coming here. That was already in my mind because Hannah Arendt instigated that thought process. I was also asked then to talk a little bit about my own PhD research, and I didn't really know how important it would be to the group, so I included one slide, how I came to that topic, what I'm doing right now. I'm in Jena. I'm trying to write a book on what happens to the individual capacity of judgment when we live in a modern differentiated society. And see to the right some people I worked with who influenced me a lot. I like to work with people who smile, and they all smile. I included them because you asked me about the resonance concept, and I had the privilege of getting to know Hartmut Rosa. But I thought it's, Hartmut Rosa is not the only person who may had an impact on my thinking. Silvana Tomaselli, who wrote a book on Wollstonecraft and 18th century political thought and early feminism, was very important to me. And Barbara Carnevali, who does research on social aesthetics and how aesthetic sensibilities and perceptions influence the social, were also very important to me. And here you see an illustration from the first article that I in fact published, where I encountered this problem that once society differentiates, it actually forces us to do things that are beyond the sphere of what we can know. So that the topic of how knowledge and society interrelate became important to me, and that's kind of what I'm working with at the moment. And also, if you have questions about resonance concept, it's something that I think you wanted to discuss, or acceleration theory, that's kind of where I am right now. But I thought it is more interesting for this talking about transformation to actually not go into that too much, because the topic that I am at the moment studying, how in fact we fail to know what we need to know in modern societies, is concerning a failure of transformation. It's not yet teaching us a lot about how sociologists thought about transformation. So I wanted to go this step back and think about what did I actually learn from sociologists about transformative social processes. And then I thought during the discussions that, well, actually the case of Scotland might be very interesting when coming to Ukraine. And I'm going to talk about why. Adam Smith, you might know his name. So you could say the first modern economist, although he was not the first one to think about the economy, was Scottish. And I didn't know that before, but Scottish history is very interesting. Scotland is one of the only examples of, well, first of all, yeah, I'm not going to put it out there, but do you see a difference between these two maps? This one is a map between 1665. This one is a map 1751. It's kind of around 90 years difference. Both are political maps from an atlas. So that's very much like kind of the Google Maps of 16th and 17th and 18th century. What do you notice?
The first map, Scotland was independent, but in the second map, Scotland was integrated in Great Britain.
Exactly. Scotland disappears. At the beginning of 18th century, Scotland as an entity disappears. There is no Scotland anymore. It's a very curious case. Scotland is the only country in Western Europe that has formally surrendered its own political sovereignty. They came together as a parliament in 1707 and said, let's stop to exist as a country. Let's stop to exist as a political entity. It's very interesting. Why would someone do that? Why would a country like noblemen, the elite, the political elite of country, say, let's just give it up? There's a history to this. The Scotland and England have always been in rivalry. In the Middle Ages, there were many wars between Scotland, the purple, and England, the yellow part of the British Isles. The Scottish have been historically allied with the French, and when the English were fighting in France, the Scottish and the English were fighting in the north. The Scottish were speaking a unique variety of English. It's called Scots, in fact, which is a kind of more in the south of Scotland. It's an old English language that's been supplemented with some Gaelic, Celtic influences. And then in the north of Scotland, closer to Ireland and the Atlantic Sea, they would still speak Gaelic, the Celtic language. And the society would be very feudal, kind of, you know, you have lords and peasants and serfs, and kind of everyone knows their place, and very war-centered. So Scottish warriors were often used to kind of be sent on foreign campaigns. And the Scottish king, they had an own dynasty, they were known like their own kingdom. As I said, constantly in rivalry with the English. And after the Tudors, you might remember like Henry VIII and the formation of the Anglican Church. There was a moment in English history, which is very funny because England was always the more powerful country, more money. You had about 2 million Scots and about 40 million English people at some point, so it's kind of not so equal. The Scottish, in fact, ascended to the English throne. So the English dynasty died out, and the closest relative to the English line of succession was the Scottish dynasty. And so in about 1610 or something, Scottish king actually also became king of England. And this was a funny situation because you had these two rivalrous societies ruled by the same guy. It would be as if like Russia and Ukraine are two different countries, but they have the same king. And the king is called, like, I don't know, James, and James is king of Scotland and king of England. The English were more powerful. At some point there were some changes in the dynasty. Dutch people came, and the King of England also became the King of Scotland. And the Scottish had the worst part, because the English, over time with colonization, managed to get many trading rights. They started to have exclusive monopoly with Dutch traders, exclusive monopoly upon North American trade, and so on. And the Scottish people became poorer and poorer. They were stuck in their feudal society. They had a very, very conservative church that was ruling them. In 1690, they even still burned a student because he just kind of did theology a little bit of a different way. So it was a very conservative society and really poor. All they had was sheep and fish. And they weren't even allowed to trade with anyone, like with the Dutch, because the English were like, no, we want to trade with the Dutch. And the King of Scotland was kind of okay with that, because he was also King of England. For him, it was kind of just like, you know, whatever. So the Scottish people and the Scottish nobility were starving, and they knew they wouldn't have the power to actually make war against England. So they came up with an idea. They were like, okay, we're going to exist as a society, but we're going to surrender as a kingdom. We're going to propose to actually have a state union with England, in which our noblemen are going to become part of the parliament in London, and the King of England is going to cease to be the King of England and is going to become the King of Great Britain. And this is what happened. They proposed this plan to the English. The English were like, yeah, all right, you know, sounds like we can enlarge our country. And the Scottish nobility, in a parliamentary process, ratified this Act of Union, 1707, formally surrendered its sovereignty, and most of the noblemen moved to London, where they became part of a new political elite. So Scotland, at the beginning of the 18th century, kind of opened up. Suddenly the Scottish citizens, the Scottish merchants, the Scottish peasants had new rights. They could suddenly go abroad, they could do all kinds of things, they could emigrate, they could move to the cities, and the feudal society got transformed into a post-feudal mercantile commercial society. And all of the old lords, like the Gaelic lords and the Scottish lords, being in London, and the cities of Scotland and the towns of Scotland were suddenly ruled by new people, like merchants and peasants and craftsmen and these kinds of guys. And people also started to speak other languages, because now there was more fluctuation between these societies. The old Gaelic language died out, and more people started to speak English. So it kind of, things just happened. Things just happened in Scotland. And then you have this unique process in which a new academic elite starts to think about what is actually happening. Like, what is happening? They try to understand what is happening in their own country. That is a society, a Scottish society that has a Scottish sense of self, but that is not a country anymore. And they're starting to write books, and they start to philosophize. They go to France and come back, and all of the famous English-speaking philosophers of the 18th century, if you look at them, are actually Scottish. Francis Hodgson, teaching in Glasgow, Scottish. David Hume, famous epistemologist and theory, Scottish. Adam Smith, Scottish. Thomas Reid, Scottish. Yes, there were very few thinkers in 18th century Britain that had no relationship to Scotland. And that's why we start to speak from 1740 onwards of the Scottish Enlightenment, a distinctive brand of Enlightenment thinking that is distinct from the French Enlightenment, from the German Enlightenment, that happened especially in the University of Glasgow and Edinburgh, and also a little bit in Aberdeen, and that centered around questions of practical philosophy and practical judgment. Like they wanted to understand what was happening. And this is how some very famous works got produced. Adam Ferguson is a very interesting member of this transformative process. And he is often called the first sociologist. I put here a new symbol because he went from thinking in terms of a cycle in which political actions are implemented, new things come out, and so on, towards thinking of action in terms of non-intended consequences. People just do something, things happen, and then some kind of third thing happens as well. And what is that third thing? We don't yet know. This from an essay on the history of civil society. Very important. He's one of the first people to use the term civil society. That's like what there was no civil society before the surrendering of political sovereignty. Thomas Hobbes when he wrote 100 years before, he would talk about the Leviathan. He would use the word commonwealth. No commonwealth anymore. Scotland was no commonwealth anymore. They were a civil society. He wanted to understand what makes civil society, and I put a little a picture here of people who work in the nail factory and produce kind of things. Division of labor is happening. People move to the cities. They start new things. Right? Every step and every movement of the multitude are made with equal blindness to the future. And nations, such as the Scottish nation, stumble upon establishments which are indeed the result of human action, but not the execution of any human design. If Cromwell, this English military strategist and short-time dictator, said that a man never mounts higher than when he knows not whither he is going, it may with more reason be affirmed of communities that they admit of the greatest revolutions where no change is intended. That's a fascinating turn of thinking. He basically put it out there in 1767 that transformations like the Scottish transformation happens when, for other reasons, like noblemen trying to sustain their political power or their economic power by moving to London, other processes are being kicked off that were completely unforeseen. No one wanted to transform the Scottish society. No one wanted them to suddenly start to speak English. No one wanted the serfs and the peasants of the Northern Islands to suddenly move to Glasgow and become tobacco traders. No one wanted that. But this is what happened. And they were trying to understand it. So Adam Smith developed his theory in that context. This is what Smith really was found interesting. He was a friend of, actually not a friend of Adam Ferguson. They had kind of beef, Adam and Adam. But Adam Ferguson and Adam Smith knew about each other. And what is fascinating about Smith is that, as Slava already said, he only published 2 books in his lifetime. He wanted to understand what drives human behavior, human action, the life process of a society. And he thought, put it in a little bit simplistic terms, what makes the world go round? What makes the world go round? Money and love. Why do people do what they do? They want to be loved and they want to have enough to eat. And so he wrote 2 books, one on human desire and one on what happens when people exchange goods. And he realized that, in fact, the interrelation between what people are doing for themselves and for others is bringing about new things. Things like institutions, or money, or paper terms, or new technologies, or new things that are, again, just happening. To the left, his earlier book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, where he states that there are such things as natural desires in the human nature. And that what makes us interesting animals is that we desire to be loved, and that we don't like it when we are criticized. He writes, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely, or to be that thing which is the natural and proper object of love. He naturally dreads not only to be hated, but to be hateful, or to be that thing which is the natural and proper object of hatred. He desired not only praise, but praiseworthiness, or to be that thing which, though it should be praised by nobody, is, however, the natural and proper object of praise. He dreads not only blame, but blameworthiness, or to be that thing which, though it should be blamed by nobody, is, however, the natural and proper object of blame. Smith has a strange way of writing. He always writes in an extreme rhetorical composition, repeating the same things, the exact same formulations, all over his books again. And he burned every page with which he was not content. So this is what he wanted to leave, these sentences. On the other hand, he looks at what happens when people go out in public, when they try to form something together. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker, not from their benevolence. Benevolence means they're nice to us, they're kind, that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Nobody but a beggar chooses, that's actually how they wrote in Scotland by the time. It's pretty funny. David Hume, when you read David Hume in the original, he has funny ways of using the English language. To depend, nobody but a beggar chooses to depend chiefly upon the benevolence of his fellow citizens. Even a beggar does not depend upon it entirely. What does a beggar do? Even the little money that a beggar gets, he spends it somewhere. Or if a beggar gets a bread, perhaps the beggar wants to, change the bread into something that's more fun, like a drink. The charity of well-disposed people indeed supplies him with the whole fund of his subsistence. The greater part of his occasional wants, however, are supplied in the same manner as those of other people, by treaty, by barter, and by purchase. And that's curious, right? We have these two different souls in our breast. That on the one hand we want to be loved. Even the baker and the butcher are people who have the natural desire not to be the object of hatred. But on the other hand, once we address ourselves to someone else, if I say to Ivo, "Oh, could you please give me the bottle of water?" I would probably try to actually also appeal to him in such a way that he feels happy to give it to me. If I told Ivo, "I'm sorry, Ivo, can you give me like $100?" Just like that. He would perhaps be like, "I might need them for myself. Sorry about that." And that would be cringe. It would be very awkward if I simply went about and said, "I'm sorry, can you give me your house?" I wouldn't do that because I would assume that if I came with such a aggrandized demand to you, with such a request, I might actually overwhelm your natural propensity to also care about what's important to you, like your bed, your coffee, your space. I don't do that. It would be really awkward if I did that, so I don't do it. So between these two poles of caring about the others and caring about ourselves, we kind of attune ourselves to each other and create third things. And another author who I studied a little bit later, Georg Simmel, another sociologist, actually takes that to a new level. He develops an entire methodic way of studying society based on that idea of Wechselwirkung, which I here translated as reciprocal interaction. I'm only going to read out the part to the right, because the part to the left, Smith, where he talks about exchange, is already kind of emphasized that, is something that is very important for Simmel as well. For both Simmel and Smith, human beings are exchanging animals. We are people who exchange feelings and words and thought and all kinds of objects. And through these exchanges, we bring about third things. Society exists where several individuals enter into reciprocal interactions. This reciprocal interaction always arises from certain instincts or for the sake of certain purposes. And now there is an interesting assemblage of all kinds of things that make us interact reciprocally with each other. Erotic, religious, or merely sociable instincts, purposes of defense as well as attack, of play as well as acquisition, Smith would say purchase, buying stuff, of assistance as well as instruction, and innumerable other drives cause man to enter into a togetherness. But what is togetherness? Into an acting for one another, again with one another, against one another, into a correlation of states with others, that is, to exert effects on them and to receive effects from them. These interactions mean, and that is very interesting, these interactions mean that the individual carriers of those instigating drives and purposes become a society. For Simmel and Smith, there is no such thing as a compact society, that what Hobbes would call a commonwealth, a contract that we formed. It's more that the term society is the umbrella word, the medium of all the individual drives through which we reciprocally interact with each other. Society is the carrier, the container in which all that association is happening. Important term for Simmel as well, Vergesellschaftung, to become associated. We are not yet, when we are born, we are not yet associated. We become associated through entering into these reciprocal interactions with others. And the carrier, the container for that association is the realm of the social. And Simmel is very famous for a specific philosophical study in which he examines one specific result of human interaction, of human exchange, money. He wrote a 600 pages philosophy of money. But he didn't write it as Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations with the purpose of finding out how a society can actually become prosperous. He wrote it with the purpose of understanding how this non-intended consequence of human activity transforms the societies that bring it about. Money, he says, is such an interesting object because when I want to change something with you and I want to have your watch and I give you my book, you might say, no, that's not like kind of, I want to have the book, but the watch is more important than that, so please can you also give me your like other things, like perhaps the mobile phone. And then I say, no, I don't need it, but I can give you other things. And then kind of we come to terms and we bring about a new object, which is purely there for exchange, like a money unit. But once we have that money unit, the money unit starts to flow through our interactions and transform the way we relate to each other. Simmel observed that with the flow of money, simple money units through society, on the one hand, individual liberty increases. People can suddenly pay not only with their cow, but with something. So they're not bound to the cow. They're not bound to the actual singular cow. They're bound to a new abstract concept. That makes them more free. But on the other hand, it also creates distance. People don't really talk that much to each other anymore. People don't say, oh, that's a beautiful cow, because money is just a paper and would be very boring to have a conversation about a paper note. So the third unintended consequence transforms what human beings do. And I think this is where I'm going to end, kind of going into the ending path here, that modernity is a very interesting state. Once social differentiation and the unintended consequences of human action really break free, once the political constraints, the economic constraints of what we can do start to become less and less, we start to embark upon a journey that has no real starting point and no real resting place. And this is where we enter kind of territory in which Hartmut Rosa also works. His first book was on social acceleration. He wanted to understand why individual lives suddenly have to cope with faster pace. And it has two sides. On the other hand, on the one hand, we realize that it's quite interesting new feeling to let oneself be transformed by something that one does not yet know. Hartmut Rosa calls that resonance. Resonance is something that comes from without and then kind of by affecting me, transforms me in a way that I couldn't have foreseen. So for that, I need that openness to things that are going to come. A little bit like a wind that comes. On the other hand, when I don't really know where my actions are going, right? Like remember Adam Ferguson, no man mounts higher than the one who does not know where he is going. It's kind of nihilism, fleetiness. We have no home. We lack orientation. The impossibility to find a horizon in a world that has no single horizon anymore. That's I don't know whether you know George Lukács, but Lukács' theory of the novel starts from that observation. We lost the closed cosmos, the closed world. And this lack of a horizon creates alienating experiences. I like the book by Manfred Frank, which I put here not so much for the book, but simply for the picture. Around the time of 1500, new myths appear in the talking sphere of Western European humans. The Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman is the cursed sailor who can never go to land, who is forced to remain on the open sea forever. It's a new myth. It's a new myth of modernity. Wagner's opera, The Flying Dutchman, tries to encapsulate that experience of modern alienated life. And I think that this can speak to us. We are very often like sailors on an open sea. And just as Smith and Ferguson observed, we have very little that is actually up to us. We have the wind and the waves and the storms and all these things that come, the unintended consequences of human action. And sometimes we can just kind of decide whether we go to the left or the right, whether we take that current and that stream or another one. That's a condition that is very hard to accept. and that probably modernity is challenging us with. Here I have a funny video of Slava Žižek. I don't know how to play it because I don't know how this works, but it's a 4-second video. It's basically just nice Žižek who explains the world. I found the video on Reddit. It says Slava Žižek explains the world in 3 seconds.
Things happen. Things happen here and there.
I found that very funny, so I included it here, because I think it's also the quintessential distillation of what the non-intended consequences of human actions present us with, and that we need to take into account when we think of action, of human action. And that's it. Things happen. And the end of my PowerPoint presentation, which I cannot yet, which I cannot access anymore, is just that. We know act. We happen. We happen. That's the quintessential contribution from sociology that I want to just put out into the open here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we originally thought that Slava could just kind of respond to me now.
You see that this format came rather natural, but I also think from that Marx felt that I just have kind of nothing to present, and he said, well, let's do it together, so you can kind of move along with my structure and then kind of try to comment on that. And I felt a relief that, yes, that I will probably find out what to say. And that while he was talking, I've actually experienced very interesting and profound thing. I've connected that to what Philonikos said yesterday, actually. So I have that system, yes, of I was thinking about, I will tell you more about that, but I have a PhD thesis to write, actually. So I was thinking about that, I was struggling and, kind of leaving the struggle, yes. I was stuck, that was the way I stuck. And now Marx unfolded his meta system. And I was just sitting there and trying to understand what's the purpose of my system within that new context of it. So that was very helpful, and basically I wrote notes on what emerged and how my system can unfolded along the way. So also I draw on the context of what Ivo said and what he was talking about. Yet I think so it's hard for me to start, but the topic, the PhD topic I write on, I named it the existential crisis in the situation of war trauma, and the inspiration for that, it's rather complex. The phenomena I stumbled upon was actually the amputees, the warriors with severe traumas, and what's the context of that connection? That's just the rowing experiences. That's one photo, but we provided our facility for them to visit us. And while talking with them and just feeling alone, I saw an interesting thing, which I can condense in saying they usually have less body, but more life. So what you said in the first quote, I've just remembered, I wrote down the last thing about life and life fertility. That is actually what all of life, it's all of this what's about, yes. And you see, the thing with body is that that's kind of our vehicle, yes. And when the body is fully abled, we use it. as we talked with Victor also, and we are rich with our body. So while we're rich, we can be decadent in a way. We can use words, just throw them away. We can throw food around. We can also do that action of imposing your mental construct onto the reality, because you have enough power to make that somehow happen. But this case, when you are powerless, you have no power, no physical ability to impose anything on anybody. That's where the actually life comes from, the unfolding of life through that traumatized body which wants to live. You see, that's the case of Adam Smith, and also I ask myself, and since it's crazy because I'm doing philosophy, but I'm doing case study, how come? So that's one of the problems of my PhD. How can I put into words, and what I'm actually trying to put in the words? And while Max was performing and talking, basically, I want to look at life within the Ukrainian extremely traumatized society. And I was asking, so also, let's just put it away, and I will talk a little more about the inspiration. So someone who knows me, for example, Vlad knows me, I was connected to Father Alexander Chumakov. And that connection was profound, and he was kind of expert in that life and in what we just did with evil. So that's now it was performed in a setting, but that was just usual conversation and the kitchen table. It was the level of it was that, and you can actually live in that just new realm. It's fine. It's not extraordinary. It's actually ordinary. What's extraordinary? It's that crazy mentalist conception of reality and me trying to impose it on everything and just keep the life in the Proskurian bed in a way of our mental construct. So, but he died in 2022, soon after the war struck, and I left in a world with no genuine connection, while being really accustomed to that connection. So I felt that way. Well, there are a lot of people around me, but I can't. That's no speech, nothing. We talk things. We just doing something, but I'm deeply silenced and depressed by that. What's interesting is that those guys don't have such a problem, or that was the reality. That was the reality which needs the same level of connection and unfolding and presencing to connect with, as my experience with the monk, with Father Alexander Chumakov. So, well, then what's the context I'm living in? So you see, the context I'm living in is probably I'm not knowledgeable enough. Is that is actually where the life in Ukrainian society emerges, and that trauma, amputation, loss, that's actually the sources of the life, of the profound connection to that presencing. That's one thing. So you see, the question here is yeah, that's one thing. But while you present it, I ask myself, well, how that possibly can be that the Ukrainian society somehow end up in a way that the only possible kind of sneak into reality is represented by that trauma, but by amputation. And then I thought, well, what's the story of Ukraine? Yeah, and then I think of the culture of master classes. Then basically my question is, what were the teachers of our teachers who taught people who taught us things. And I just you know, I've been to business school, and basically what we learn is a bunch of mental concepts, and the need to coordinate the reality in terms of those mental concepts. And who has more precise and profound concepts, basically better instruments, better kind of artificial pointers, and now probably you can say lasers to cut into the reality, will be more successful. In a way, that's the same thing we had while trying to say numbers, but in the first try. So you eventually end up you kind of preparating the flesh of being with those instruments, and then the first masterclass was probably magnificent. That's a new knowledge, and people start, we can do psychology, kind of, we can do different things like theater classes, businesses, all this thing. That's cool. But what if we already passed that methodology? What if it doesn't make sense anymore? We can't connect to the being with those concepts because our being is now formed by those concepts. So we end up with a lesser quality of a being. I need another kind of concepts to that, so I can dig into more. Then we use more powerful concept. Then again, more powerful concept. And we just move into singularity, and we end up in a complete virtual society. That's kind of Baudrillardian kind of way of simulation. So then we we try to cook the simulacra, which isn't that tasty, but it's now total. So the real and the unreal is now the part of simulacra. And what Michael said, that kind of society can't help itself. Because what you consider real is already a simulacra, but you have no clue. Because the organ of your clue was cut off. You see, you can't. It's probably if somebody saw the Tarkovsky Stalker, yes? Железа, которая верить, атрофировалась у них. But that's the sinister reality. Sinister reality. So how you see, and the question, that's more sinister that you can actually think of. Yes. So I was a little bit kind of driven off, but also I feel that it's at least that touches me, that understanding that touches me. So I just don't have enough potential to kind of put it into forms. Let me look what I also. So yes. Basically, the unionizing tech, what we also Max presented yesterday, that type of top-down kind of thing, which will end up in complete horror. So mental against unfolded. That's yes. Then yes. So how basically what I understood is with that case, with what I tried to look at, I tried to look at the real within the unreal system. Basically, I'm trying to look at self-resurrecting system or self-resurrecting society. How does life constantly contradicts that simulacra? And the Scotland case inspires me. So I'm skipping kind of because the Scotland case inspired me because the history of Scotland became with the loss, and loss perpetuate them into that new beginning of them. So that's basically what they were completely stuck in their simulacra of how the things should be. And the loss kind of unfolded that. And so there is no Scotland anymore. And I connected, there is no leg, no hand anymore. So you need to do something with that. That's a completely kind of unfinished project, and what I'm sharing with you, it's also just for also you just questioning that, just I don't have any finished kind of things. I don't want to, seems like I want to tell you something, and no, I even don't have, that's phrase, I just want to share. So it's, because I felt that while I'm presenting, I need to end up in some, like, you know, yes. Also, I'm working through that while I'm talking to you. That's very important for me. You see, that's, but also with those, with the trauma, because the Ukrainians are being traumatized also. Those are Ukrainians. Those are kind of parts of this society. So, kind of one of my, those are basically hypotheses. Yes, is that if your body being that profoundly changed, you can't avoid transformation. You can't avoid rebuilding yourself, and that's what rehabilitation processes are like. People do rebuild themselves from the basics, from the very ground up. They can't miss those, what Ivo, for example, said, that head, the heart, the belly, that fully present. You become having more body than you have before, because you actually need to re-enter your body and restart it fully. But by re-entering the body, you see what happened. That was the part of our exercise, to sit, to be fully present, not cognize, and then we had that profound revelation that we could talk to each other. That was the exercise, but the people with trauma, they just can't do it differently. It's just impossible to do it differently. And it's usually, I mean, if you will meet the person with the prosthesis or with amputation or stuff, just watch how you act, how you move, what moves away, what are drivers towards you, and almost all those drivers will be false, because that your cognition kind of wants to do something with something which completely disrupts the simulacra. It's just so yeah. If to talk. Yes, but also one more hypothesis. I'm already messy. So what I think about the nature of the war is that, and Adam Smith, it strikes me as a phenomenological kind of approach to observation. So he observed something, but I do think that the war starts is when that Smithian observation is no longer possible. So Smith said, well, I want to observe reality. And he was able to observe something. He wasn't imposing that. We talked with Marx about that the difference between Smith and probably other scholars is that Smith didn't want to, that deductive method, he was just looking inductively, and that word you mentioned was very fascinating for me, that when you don't know the trajectory, the exact trajectory, that's not mathematical knowledge. Yet I kind of posited that in Ukrainian society, the Smith will burn all the pages. He wouldn't have he would not be able to actually write anything about real, because the real is absent. Yet it's not absent, you see, because if I say, well, real is absent, then what we just did with Ivo was just straight up magic, just an emotional kind of atmosphere, and we felt, I mean, that's the start of our cult now. Let's do that, and go somewhere in the woods. Yes, so the real is there, and real wants to emerge. And then the only way human beings, the only technology for human beings, not the only one, but the prevalent one, is the war, to emerge that real and to actually reconnect with the reality. Yes, unfortunately. So, yeah. War. Just straight up. So being in a situation when your body is about to be killed or ruptured or something. For you who know Russian language, you probably know подлинность. The word подлинность. Who knows the word подлинность? You know, yes? But what does it mean? Because подлинность, that's truth, yes? That's something подлинник we say about the pictures. Original, we say. In English, that means nothing in English. Or let's say authenticity, yes. Let's say authentic, yes. But if you look at that word, подлинность and подлинами, and lean, I mean not lean like lean in, but lean Russian word means the stick with which you hit someone. You see, so that's the подлинность is a heavy bodily experience of unable to say anything except truth, because your body being kind of tortured. So you see where I'm coming with that. Well, no end to that. You see I'm messy, that's work in progress. So please, if you could help me, please help me. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Julia?
I do have two important points I want to say, and actually it's connected with both of the presentation. The first one, when we are talking about transformation, we are talking about that as it's something desirable, very pleasant, and everybody wants to go through the process of transformation. But very often, the real transformation is very, very painful process. Because you need, like, it doesn't matter which, is it transformation of self? Is it transformation of, I don't know, like community, or is it transformation like a system of the whole country? The process is always very, very painful. And because like in regards of laws, this is something like that, so like you need to cut off the part of yourself or of your, of yourself, and you have hole within this part, and you need to put something into that. Like just for us, because like the topic also is transformation, so like it's not fair to have this one-sided picture that okay, let's transform ourselves or something like that. And it's also connected to my second point, and because you mentioned resonance and Hartmut Rosa about this openness. Because we are talking about being open, being able to invite the other person to be within us and all this stuff, and it's also like we are talking about this as about something desirable and all this stuff, and yeah, it can be transformative experience, but because actually the world, especially right now, especially in Ukraine, in itself has so much pain, then if you are like too much open, it can be overwhelming. Like I can feel, because like I do have this quite big like opposition when I'm in Sweden and when I'm in Ukraine. I can physically, especially in Kiev, I can physically feel how space is filled by pain.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it was important, like my important thought during the week, and Ivo said it the other day, that being being in resonance with somebody or in connection with somebody, it can be dangerous to like quit yourself or be completely transparent and to allow, and it doesn't matter, allow the other person or the world to come through you, because Nastya said in this exercise with Lida that she felt the presence of leader so huge, and it was just one person, and we allow the whole world enter through to our body, so like it can be overwhelming, and it can be like even not so pleasant than how we are talking about it. Is it like, oh, let's transform and like blah 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 blah. So that it's not so cool process. Yep. It can be cool, probably. Like I guess that it can be in different ways, but I guess it's important to emphasize also this side, not to have idealistic picture in our head and have the slogan, let's transform ourselves, our community, the world, the country, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, it's my comment.
If I may directly react to it, I mean, also to connect it to your question about George Lukács. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I thought I don't want to talk about resonance here. I want to talk about the murky and shadowy sides of transformation processes. The transformation in Scotland was brutal. It drove people away from their farms. People had to make place for sheep because new people who suddenly got money wanted to make more money. People had to migrate. Things just happened, and it was not. It exceeded consciousness. It was not a transformation that came about because people suddenly started to become present to each other. There was no process of like presencing. It was brute force, economic force, not political force. Interestingly, no war. It's very, very central to Adam Smith's and to Ferguson's theory that war was absent. And actually, an interesting kind of inverse aspect of Ferguson's theory, especially a history of civil society, is that he was asking himself, what does it actually do to a warrior society, like these Celtic warriors, when suddenly they can't go to war anymore? What happens to them? They lose their identity. They lose their sense of social cohesion, their world. And Ferguson was one of the last priests, he was also a priest, who preached in the Highlands and who spoke Gaelic. So there is this side that every transformation, the social transformation, has this other side of the coin. And I mean, there's a path from Smith to Marx. Marx praised Smith because Marx was like, Smith developed, like saw something very important that, and Arendt criticizes him for that, but I think Marx has got this point right, that this transformation does not come from public action. It does not come from a conscious decision, but from the life process itself, from the things that happen, and that the things that happen have their own regularity, and that regularity is not always leading to good results. And Marx was trying to actually understand what happens when a society transforms from a feudal to a bourgeois society. He invented the word capitalism for that. So once we go into social theory, we cannot escape this dual side of human action, human action not in the Arendtian sense, but more in the statistical, behavioristic sense, that it inflicts pain on people. And Lukács is a very interesting example of someone who wants to get away from that. He wants to return from this awareness that the modern world has become open and non-cyclical and also inflicting and unpredictable. He actually wants to go back to a communistic vision of there is a sovereign, there is the labor class, there is a shared consciousness in history that can unify us and implement and can be implemented. And Marx had the same desire to return to a cyclical vision of consciousness. So this desire to be embedded into something that is stable, to have this consciousness, this we feeling, we do this together, is really strong. And modernity constantly crushes that. Lukács died, I think, as an unhappy man because he saw that communism, as he envisioned it, didn't lead to the best results and couldn't be implemented. And Marx as well.
Yeah, it may be helpful also on an individual level. Filon and Co. brought in Robert Keegan. He's a developmental psychologist, I guess you could call him. So he makes these distinctions between various levels of development. The first being the socialized mind. It's like when you're in your culture of embeddedness. Then after a crisis of meaning, when you lose your world, you can kind of go into what he calls the self-authoring mind, which is a mind that is already more agentic and has the capacity to kind of like, increased agency to shape their world. And after that comes the self-transforming mind, which is a mind that is able to continuously reflect on the processes of meaning making. And that is a kind of mind that is much more comfortable with this certain kind of change. But that self-transforming kind of mind is only like maybe 5% of the population or something like that. So most people, are not able to keep up with the pace of this, what Archer, the model that I brought in, calls social morphogenesis. It's uncomfortable. She says that too. It can go too fast when we elaborate these social structures. There is kind of a case for pace and taking people along in these processes whenever we enter the political realm and say we need change. So transformation is by no means like a comfortable process, right? The loss of the world is existential crisis. It's very hard.
But I think, can I add a comment and also to what you say, because somehow I have the feeling that we are going a step back in some way to the okay, now everything is materialism, now everything just happens. But we do it also can help to find the problem of what you're saying, that things happens and the pace of things happening is too fast for human and we lose culture. And I think this is the topic which is like really, really present for, I mean, this is, can I finish?
Yeah, sure.
Like for example, Barbara, when what really shaped her, and she said it really several times, was living in this desperatehood of a lost culture and within it. And here it's not just happening. Here the person of I don't want to say opening, but of allowing new meanings to emerge. And I think here the actor as a person becomes really, really important. It's for you.
Yeah, sure.
In this point of things happening, and we as people, which is our usual ability, not being that fast in changing as things evolve, and we are losing our culture, so we are kind of getting emptied. We are getting, this is the material part. The material part and just how the world works is emptying us. But this is, I think, also the point of an actor, which is not just material.
I would like to give the word to Tim, because he wanted to say something, and then afterwards you, and then Slava.
And then we will talk about the journal.
No, okay.
Yep. I like this double presentation. If you both, we are having this both together, that's good. What I had to think about that, I think it's important to be reminded that like civilization in a sense of like self-organized society is not like the natural state, and it can be intentionally destroyed. It can be by will defended, and it is therefore connected with action, and I think especially in times of crisis of civilization, of certain standards, it's important to come back to this vision that societies can vanish, and the non-existence or the complete destruction of society is you have to know that it's not natural that societies function and work.
In a way, yeah.
I have to agree with, it's pretty weird, but I have to agree with Slava Žižek. So things just happen, and that's it, just, and there is, it's this my point, so there is no really need for another human being. There is like short way to avoid even to link this things happening with another human being. So it could be like in Kaspar's it transports pictures like human whole the world, I suppose. So there is a step like forward, or I suppose forward from this philosophy as sociology, as for me. So yeah, it could be also some processes, but it's not necessary as for me. So yeah, it's just.
Yeah, I wanted to answer to Maria what she said, that you said about actor, and it's very important, but also that's the real deal. I mean, the amputation or just a trauma. Also, for the context, that Father Shumakov had immense problem with legs, basically no skin on the. That's so kind of, and that's real. It's kind of nothing metaphysical about it in a way. But here you see, it's interesting is that the real, very similar to the scream of that child. It doesn't ask. It's just that. But my response to real is also kind of a scream, in a way when I can't control it, if I can't do anything. So basically, when somebody kind of connects with the warrior, yes, who got amputated, even if he is completely fine with that and worked through that. That usually the other part of the spectrum is just straight up different ways of noises, of canceling, of just scream of simulacra, or just I mean that's not that fast of a change, you know, and it yeah, and that's yeah, and inability, the unavoidance. So here is everything is about can't go anywhere else. The unavoidability of the reality just being present to you, expressed as various types of scream of that actor. That's actually that's an act, but you don't want it, but you act. And an interesting thing is, so also I just always want to, that's important to me, just to say that I can control the levels of reality, because if something is too real, I can walk away from that, and that will be true for everybody here. We can control it, and not really, you can't control it. Sure, then you scream. But you see, and that makes us kind of in a way dual or something. Yes, and the whole point of that impossibility of, if you have that real, if the real is unavoidable, if that's kind of a headache or various types of chronic pain or amputation or just probably a prison. You know, those types of kind of experience, which is ascesis, yes. And now it all just kind of goes into, it could go into religious kind of language, and yeah, and we know what happens with religion in the post-Soviet countries and Soviet countries. So yes, but I'm just trying to say, the problem is more immense than that you could imagine while having a chance of not solving that problem. You see, that's also what Filonenko told about event. If the school is an event, you need to align yourself to the extremities of that alignment, to go to the extreme alignment, which is basically just alignment. Yeah. But we're able not to do that by just being so rich with our time. We are just billionaires with that, So we're able to just spend it all.